Parlo io? Benissimo, grazie mille, grazie anzitutto per...
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm really very pleased to be here today. It was a heavy day. We've been listening to very interesting presentations with lots of suggestions and comments. I will not dwell on mentioning all the topics discussed again, but I will make just a few comments. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Camelli for inviting me and also Rector Carraro for hosting us and all of you for staying so late. I liked discussion on knowledge society very much, and I liked this last talk very much. Well, why do we at the Bank of Italy become interested in these topics? Why have we been invited? Well, I'm an economist. Before being the governor of the Bank of Italy, I've been dealing with these issues for a long time. At the Bank of Italy, we have been concerned with these topics very much. The same is true for the OECD, where I spent some time. And when I left, these topics continued to be tackled. Some people refer to a stagnation in our economy. It's actually not a decline, but a true stagnation. Much of what is discussed today was already well known 8-10 years ago. Not just diagnosis, but also forecasts were there already. Maybe they were not well understood because they were not expressed correctly, but maybe they were also neglected because it's hard to act politically if the political horizons are so short-term. Certainly knowledge, culture, and human capital, as well as the environment, are investments and assets that have to be protected and enhanced because they contribute to our well-being, our ability to generate income, and generating income also means that you are in a better position to appreciate all these assets. At the same time, these assets can be either exploited or neglected if income is produced or generated to their detriment, and this is something we have recently witnessed. Well, why is the Bank of Italy concerned with all this? Because it's a central bank and its mandate is to guarantee currency stability. In our current scenario, which is common to other Euro countries, this takes place by participating all together. As far as I'm concerned, I participate in my personal capacity, but I'm supported by the Bank of Italy. This is not the only element about central banks. We need to guarantee financial stability, not alone, certainly together with others, but with an increasing role as the crises worsen. Financial stability depends on the financial setting. Credit given to small and medium-sized enterprises, which are very dynamic and export a lot, is something we should be careful about because many of these enterprises are not so dynamic and don't export so much. But in order to ensure financial stability, we have to be sure that the risk side is well covered. Some of these risks are risks which build up if a system stays in stagnation or in an economic downturn for a too long period of time. And faced with these risks, how much can we bet on recovery within a certain time? The banks should have guaranteed risk coverage. If the crises are not specific for one sector but diffuse, they have stronger implications and a stronger impact. I will speak about just a few points. Among these, the role of young people and the job market. As Professor Camelli and Stefano Scarpetta said, a recession worsened the situation on the labor market. As far as young people are concerned, it had been so for a long time. There is instability, welfare segmentation, low entry wages. Brandolini mentioned analyses in which not only have entry wages decreased, but also the ability to rise in one's career has decreased compared to the past generations. Well, we were saying before that those from the past generations were not actually better, but perhaps had more luck. This should also be kept into consideration. So young people suffered from the Great Recession that started in 2008. They suffered in Italy more than elsewhere. Delayed access to the job market is due to cyclical effects. The problem was that this was superimposed to a trend of major changes, and I'll refer to this soon. We all know the data on this, and we know that in the last 5 years, the youth unemployment rates dropped dramatically. It dropped more than for adults. Mrs. Freguia mentioned something weird. If there is a recession, you have less probability to find a job, and basically there should be a tendency to invest more in education and training, because on the one hand you have less to do and you can catch up in the future, but of course one needs resources to do so. This is a basic point. Having resources available and having the feeling that it's worthwhile. Perhaps this feeling is not there. This explains why many young people are not employed and do not attend any training course. It's 28% of them, 40% in the south. It's all too many of them. While young employed people have dropped by 7 percentage points in the last 4 years, those who continued attending university courses and continued investing in training have increased by only 1 percentage point. Certainly, the trend towards continuing to attend university has continued, but what was not there was the search for knowledge in order to meet the needs of a world which is different from even a couple of years ago. our economic system has adapted late to these new changes. It is still adapting, and in some respect, it has not yet adapted. There are changes which, in my opinion, date back to the Cold War. Globalization is the result of this. Major economies have entered the trading world. These economies used to be outside this scenario before. This is what we call globalization. Then there was major technology innovation, not just because of new technologies, IT and communication technologies, but also technologies in other sectors. With the end of the Cold War, what was available for military purposes and defense purposes became available for civilian purposes. Demographic data have changed as well. We have adjusted to this too late. Now, it is said that we have to change and make progress. Certainly, this late adaptation has had implications on indebtedness and certain flows. We are in a better condition than other countries, talking about flows coming in and coming out of the state. But you know that certain resources have to be used to pay debts. It is a sort of vicious circle. I think that protected or sheltered services have to be made less sheltered. We said it several times with Stefano Scarpetta. Innovative enterprises must have more convenient access to the capital market. It's a question of habits for sure, but it's also an assessment of the credit merit. Then bureaucratic burdens should be less. And somehow, if there is more flexibility on the labour market, this flexibility must be accompanied by adequate protection of those who tend not to find satisfaction or fulfillment of their expectations on the job market. But really, propensity towards innovation is a basic fact. This means favoring those companies that are in a better position to be competitive, but not in a simplistic way, that is simply on the basis of low prices. They have to be dynamically competitive, which means they must be able to innovate all the time, and they have to be able to compete at global level. Unfortunately, what we came across over the last few years was something unfavorable, which has to do both with the paradoxes and vicious circles mentioned before, and also with the fact that those that were mostly hit by all this were the young people. The paradox is linked to the quality of education. The quality of education is what counts when you talk about human capital. The human capital is not just what you obtain by attending classes where you learn basic concepts from a scientific point of view, and also from the point of view of history of art, sciences, etc. But it's also the new competencies that count and that matter. What Minister Profumo mentioned this morning: critical spirit, critical approach, team working, problem-solving abilities. Over time, we've seen a decline in these skills. If they were not present, we did not invest enough in them, and if they were present, there was a decline in them. As was said today, we need to be researchers, all of us, because we are lagging behind other countries. What we lack is the qualities that will be measured in the PIAC project that Mr. Scarpetta was referring to. 10 years ago, there was another project called ALL. It was about literacy and ability to understand texts and solve problems. It was a test made on adults. And actually, functional literacy in our country was found to be in the order of 80%, 50% for the States and Switzerland, 40%, I think, if I'm not wrong, for Canada, 30% for Norway. I believe that these rates are now lower, but they're really very high if there is change, and change can be dealt with only if you have special assets. Now, an additional point is about what was said before on demand and supply, what counts and what does not count, says law. And Dr. Keki was a bit provocative. I don't think it's only a matter of demand and supply. It's a matter of how we approach change and what is new. You know, if there is no demand, there is no supply, and things can go worse. We need to be able to acquire these certain abilities which can only be generated through knowledge. It's a matter of having an unknown land in front of you, a place you don't know very well. It will be mostly occupied by young people of today and tomorrow, doing jobs that we can't think of today, similarly to 20 years ago, when we could not even imagine that the main jobs would be about wellness and the care of the individual. We could not think of this 20 years ago, or we could not think that there would be new jobs relating to information technology and demographics. The same will be true for the future. It's not just about job creation and identifying sectors where young people need to study, but it's about changing the basic conditions of the social and economic system in which we're living. And we need to add those competencies to knowledge. People must be in a position to reason and use a critical approach to assess opportunities, costs, benefits, and what is ahead of us.
Certo.
There's one thing that we have to take it for granted. There's a number of jobs, standardized jobs, that are not to be found nowadays. For example, if you have to buy your air ticket, you don't go to the travel agents, but you buy it online. So that is a job that has disappeared. But more than that, and there are many jobs where the personal contribution is going to be very important. There are other intellectual jobs that are going to be developing, where they're going to be to base to ourselves on that. We have to combine knowledge so as to win the race with the machine that many economists of the MIT and others refer to. Some 15 years ago, those economists were very young, and we started learning about them because those were the only ones who could talk about the consequences of the internet on the economy. The final consideration I'd like to touch upon is that there are important benefits to be drawn from studying. And this is true as of today. There are important benefits to be drawn, both in terms of jobs that can be found and stable jobs as well. And there are benefits also in terms of the yield it grants. It yields perhaps less than elsewhere because the quality of training perhaps is not well perceived by those who have vacancies. It is not. There's a problem of information asymmetry. When the average is low, there are summits that are not well recognized, so little salaries are offered, and those who have to learn a job, who have to learn and skill and invest in themselves because of the low salaries, there's a lower trend in investing. And this basically is an explanation of this vicious circle which is triggered. And something else which is even more important explains why we, in a country with a low human capital stock, the yields are very low. We often talk about flexibility in the labor market, flexibility in terms of manufacturing, and flexibility is something that we pay lip service to, and yet it is very important. At times, flexibility is not the best it could be. A number of resources were criticized, probably on the right grounds, but as I believe that we should devote greater attention to all reforms are tabled when it comes to the labor market, because those reforms were tabled to introduce the wrong kind of flexibility. With the important reforms that were adopted at the end of the 90s, what happened was that the jobs of young people were made much more fluid, as it were. We talk about temps. Basically, young people were offered many opportunities to enter the labor market at low cost for the companies, though. Now the world has changed, and companies have to change swiftly. Those who succeed changing are reaping great successes. There are a lot of small to medium enterprises that are exporting successfully. Many other companies are not successfully. They don't seem to be able to change. And AlmaLaurea has talked about the need to urge change, but since no change is introduced, they have problems with the profit. So what do? They cut on costs. And how do they cut on costs? They replace old generation human capital that are very extremely costly with human resources that are young, that cost less, and they are asked to perform things for which they are overqualified. Thus, they limit costs and they correct their balance, but just for the short term. Then the money loans are obtained by the bank, but then again, this is a vicious circle because these companies basically have to quit. To leave some room to companies that can survive this world successfully. And this is also a responsibility shouldered by the banks. Banks should not just look into guarantees, tangible guarantees. They should always be keen in analyzing the future prospects for growth of the companies that they subsidize or that they lend money to. We shall be faced with a very difficult and uphill task. There's a world recession underway that we define as wide-ranging and that was triggered by a financial crisis. I believe that that financial crisis has deep-rooted origins. The reasons for our origins certainly are the consequence of a lack of adjustment rather than a rapid adjustment. And they are rooted in the structural features of the Italian economy, as is true for the financial problems of today that are again the result of budget policies that have been followed for many years on end in our country. We can't really believe that macroeconomic actions, despite them being necessary, connected, for example, to unconventional monetary policies that we triggered in the euro area, well, such policies trying to keep liquidity at sufficient level because, loans shouldn't stop altogether, and yet we are not sure that such policies really trigger loans unless companies learn to look ahead in the future. We cannot be tricked into believing that that can solve the long-standing problems of our country. These policies are wide range. Those reforms, so we do need reforms. Our economy has to be made more inclusive, both with reference to women and young people being included in the labor market, and barriers are to be eliminated of a social and economic nature. Such barriers are guiding the destinies of many people to their families. I believe that the investment in terms of knowledge is a key element of our policies. If there's little money, we should put that in the human capital. That it should be our top priority. Then there are problems connected to the redistribution of wealth. We have to create consensus for this redistribution, for this investment in human capital, and this is a responsibility which lies with politicians. This is a responsibility which lies to those of the ruling classes, and I believe that all of you sitting in this hall are members too. The economic yields and returns of these investments are well known both for the individuals and for the society at large. As a matter of fact, they bear importantly on productivity. As to the indirect effects, well, these are as important, if not even more important. And that relies on the capability to trust other people, to grow at social level, educating to compliance with the law, to the rule of law. Well, I believe that is the basics of education. Our country seems not to be able to invest in that which is indeed a prerequisite to invest at other levels. To invest in knowledge, you have to invest in those who produce knowledge, investing in all those who educate. Here we're sitting in a university hall, and investing in those who hold knowledge is very difficult. In Italy, 70% of university professors is less than 40 years, as against 30% in France or UK, 50% in Germany. Secondary school features an 8% of teachers with less than 40 years, or with much higher percentages in other countries. So basically, we have to bridge the gap. We have to clearly understand where we're heading to. To wrap up, Let me say that compliance with the rules is to be accompanied with the fight against crime. We have a problem with investment in Italy. Investment of Italians in Italy, investment of foreigners in Italy. This is what we need. This is all important in order to have more investments and start growing again. I'd like to read out a sentence, something that I had written down in other opportunities, that knowledge can certainly contribute importantly to the growth of a country. Then our growth strategy cannot do without education. I'm not just referring to university education, but education as such. For the university to be effective, as was said in the panel discussion by a foreign colleague, school is at the very basis of university. University cannot replace the study in producing that basic knowledge based on which our wisdom is based. So we need school, primary school, secondary school, and university alike. We have to invest ourselves in our education, and investment is not just to be made by the public sector. Indeed, we have to invest together as members of a society, but we do invest also individually. So financial resources are to be set aside for education. And knowledge is to be disseminated to educate the citizens of the 21st century. In order to do that, we have to be consistent in our work. And we have to attach great meaning to merit without being meritocratic, as was said this morning. Thank you.